A classic fairy tale is at the very center of some really modern, really heated debates. But what if we react so strongly to stories like Snow White because they're tapping into something ancient, something deep inside our own psychology? In this explainer, we're going to unpack a fascinating psychological reading of the story that might just turn everything you thought you knew completely on its head. Let's dive in. So here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off by looking at why this story is so controversial today. Then we'll get into a really interesting concept from primate science called fertility suppression. After that, we'll use that theory to decode the characters, break down the Queen's 3 deadly gifts, and finally try to understand why these old stories have such a powerful, lasting grip on us. All right, so first up, why is the story under fire? You've probably seen the headlines, right? The controversies, especially around the new movie adaptations. It feels like absolutely everyone has a strong opinion on Snow White. And that really leads to the big question, why are we still fighting over Snow White? I mean, the sheer intensity of this debate suggests there's way more going on here than just some simple kid story. And the answer might be found if we stop looking at these tales as just entertainment and start seeing them as something else. See, the argument is that these narratives stick around, sometimes for thousands of years, because they're not just for fun. They're like cultural maps. They're these highly memorable, highly efficient descriptions of unchanging realities, encoding these fundamental truths about how we interact and who we are psychologically. Okay, so if these stories are maps, what kind of reality is Snow White actually mapping out for us? Well, the key to unlocking it comes from a pretty unexpected place: the study of primates. It's a concept called fertility suppression. In a nutshell, fertility suppression is exactly what it sounds like. It's this tendency for high-status females in a group to actively sabotage the reproductive chances of their rivals. And from an evolutionary point of view, the goal is crystal clear. You reduce the competition and you make sure your own genes are the ones that get passed on. And this plays out across the animal kingdom in some pretty wild ways. With baboons, it's just straight-up physical intimidation. But with marmosets, it's totally biochemical. The dominant females release pheromones that literally stop other females from ovulating. It's crazy. And in tamarins, it's all about hoarding resources, monopolizing the best food and the safest places to nest. And this is where it hits a little closer to home. The parallels in human behavior are pretty striking. For us, it's not about pheromones. It's about social and cultural pressure. Think about things like older women controlling who the younger women in the family can marry, or social norms that stigmatize teenage pregnancies, or even corporate cultures that kind of discourage you from starting a family. Okay, so with that theory in our back pocket, let's start applying it directly to the characters in Snow White. This is where the story's psychological blueprint really starts to light up. So here's our main event. On one side, you have the evil queen. She is the literal archetype of fertility suppression. Her entire being is just consumed by pride and envy for her younger rival. And on the other side, you have Snow White, who is the embodiment of everything the queen is trying to stamp out: youth, beauty that signals fertility, and all of that untapped potential. And the story makes this point in a pretty gruesome way. Remember, the queen doesn't just want to kill Snow White. No, she demands her lungs and her liver so she can eat them. She wants to literally devour her rival's vitality. This makes her the ultimate devouring mother, a maternal figure who consumes her own child's potential instead of nurturing it. The men in the story also play these really distinct symbolic roles. First, you've got the dwarfs. They represent this kind of ordinary, collective, functional masculinity. They work hard, they keep things in order, and they give Snow White protection. But the prince? He represents a higher order, more individualized masculinity. He's not just offering protection, he's offering salvation. Now, let's look at the queen's 3 attempts to kill Snow White. These are not just random attacks. They're an escalating series of symbolic gifts, and each one is designed to suppress and destroy her in a much more sophisticated way than the last. First, the queen uses these stay laces, right? Tying a corset so tight it literally suffocates Snow White, a really twisted way to pathologize her natural beauty. Next, she amps it up with the poisoned comb, a direct attack on beauty that's all about vanity. But that third gift, the poisoned apple,
That's the most dangerous one of all, because the apple isn't just a piece of fruit. It symbolizes a toxic idea, a kind of pathological knowledge. You know, a lot like the apple in the Garden of Eden. It represents a piece of knowledge that, once you take it in, poisons your soul. It's this poisonous idea that sinks Snow White, sending her into that state of suspended animation, a kind of living death.
But hold on. Who protects her from those first two attacks? The dwarfs, right? This brings us back to their role. The source calls them emblematic of the stable, ordinary, productive patriarchy. Basically, they represent the basic, functional order of a healthy society. They cut the laces, they pull out the calm. They're the protection that good, old-fashioned, common-sense community can offer.
And all of this brings us to our final question. Why do these old stories actually last? The answer lies in the really deep cultural work that these stories are doing for us, even right now, today. But here's where we see the limits of what the dwarfs can do. They can rescue Snow White from physical threats, the laces and the comb, but they're totally helpless against the poison apple. The story seems to be telling us that while a stable, functional society is absolutely essential, it's often not enough to save someone from a toxic idea that they've already bought into. And this is why the prince is so necessary. His arrival represents a totally different kind of salvation. It's not the collective, functional protection of the dwarfs. It is a real, committed, individualized relationship. And it's this higher form of personal commitment that finally shakes the poison loose and wakes Snow White up from her ideological coma.
And so we come full circle. Fairy tales like Snow White are so unbelievably powerful because they are not just for kids. They are cultural maps passed down through generations, offering us symbolic road signs for navigating the most timeless human challenges you can imagine: envy, growing up, and the profound danger of bad ideas. All of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If an ancient fairy tale like Snow White contains such a detailed map of our own psychology, it kind of forces you to ask, what unchanging realities do our own modern stories, the movies we binged, the books we get lost in, the memes we all share, what do they reveal about us?